Greetings, you sexy sons and daughters of bitches. Today we are looking at this thing called state-driven view updates in SwiftUI. Essentially, what this is it's a way to update your user interface using state properties. We'll look at that in just a sec. So, what is this? SwiftUI is going to automatically redraw or update the UI anytime there's a change in a state. Now, a state refers to the value stored in memory at a particular moment that determines how your app behaves and also how your UI is going to look. So state properties are properties or essentially variables that are declared using these things called state wrappers, and we'll look at those later, to signal to SwiftUI that when the state changes, the SwiftUI needs to go and update the actual user interface. And I'll give you a visual representation of that in just a sec to help it make complete sense. Finally, view updates happen as a result of changes in state. Any change to a state property or just a variable that's wrapped in a, a state wrapper. Any change to a state property will trigger SwiftUI to recompute the body of any views that depend on that state. Let's see if I can get my face out of here. There you go. Now you can see what's going on. So this is a part of Swift's declarative programming paradigm. Basically, this is a style of programming where you express the logic of a computation without describing its control flow, what you want to achieve without specifying how you want to achieve it. That might sound kind of weird, but I think this line kind of clarifies it. You're basically describing what the UI should look like based on a current state, and then SwiftUI is going to take care of updating the UI whenever that state changes. That's just like what we were talking about before with state-dependent user interface. So you should basically simply define your user interface in terms of your state, and UI ensures that the UI is always in sync with that state. So essentially what's going on here is you're going to have your user interface, you're going to have some property or some data that's displayed on your user interface or something that's displayed on your user interface, and that user interface element, camera's up here, the user interface element is going to be dependent on some property or some value of some variable. And you need to tell SwiftUI, you need to say, hey, this variable, it could change. It could have different values, and it could change during runtime. And so when something happens and the value of this data changes, that's going to change the UI. So then you need to go in and change that UI. All right, real quick, let's look at when you should use state-driven view updates. Basically, you're going to use state-driven view updates when the UI needs to react to changes in real-time data, user interactions, or other dynamic conditions. If your view is going to, so this is kind of put in more layman terms, if your view is going to change or affect the value of a variable that's defined within its scope, throw an @state function, and just throw @state in front of your declaration, or the declaration for that variable. So we're about to look at this code, but essentially what I mean by that is you have this view, this is your view, you have this view right here, and within it, you have this variable, count, and this variable count is going to be changed right here within the view. Since count is declared within the scope of the view, you're going to want to throw @state in front of it because it's going to be changing. So yeah, that's a really simplistic way of putting it, but it's not a bad rule to follow. So a quick, brief look at what this code actually does. Basically, we've got our tutorial code view right here. That's basically the code that's representing what's going on over here. It's all contained within here. So first we have a V stack, which is this guy being on top of these dudes, and then we've got our H stack, which is these two dudes being next to each other, embedded within the V stack. And then within the H stack, well, this top thing is just some text. It says count, and then you throw your variable in here, all some pretty basic stuff. And then down here, we're declaring a button whose action is add 1 to count, this variable up here, and this other button whose action is subtract 1 from count, this variable up here. And obviously, you can already kind of see this concept coming into play. You're essentially you're keeping track of the state of this view, and you're saying, okay, we have something within this view that's changing its state, it's changing its value. And so you can come over here, you hit increase, and it goes, oh, count is now 1, increase, count is now 2, decrease, now it's 1. It's changing the state of this variable, and essentially what's called a property wrapper is doing is it's saying, hey, SwiftUI, keep track of this variable count and see if it changes. And if it changes, then you're going to rerun body, and it's going to rerun all of this code and essentially re-render the UI, which then allows it to say, like, it comes down here and then it puts count in there instead. So you can do increase, decrease, cool stuff. I just want to point out, if you take off your property wrapper, now this is no longer a state variable, and you'll notice left side of mutating. Operator isn't mutable. Self is immutable. Essentially what that means is it can't go in and change count because it's not a state variable. It's not something that is mutable. Mutable essentially means changeable in Swift. And if I were to get rid of this, it's essentially an implied count plus equals 1. You'll notice it'll still say, there you go, self is still immutable. And so in order to change that, or in order to fix that error right here, you're going to want to come up here. If you ever see that, you're going to be like, oh, I need to turn this into a state property. And then Swift is able to deal with it and change the variable. So let's go ahead and look at a quick visual representation of what's going on here. I imagine at this point, you guys probably get the general idea of what's going on here. This is a very fundamental idea in SwiftUI. Basically, all that you're doing is saying, hey, we've got a variable. Hey, SwiftUI, it's a variable that might change during runtime. So if it does, update the UI view. But this does lead into some more complex topics. So really understanding what's going on here is very useful. First, let's look at let's just look at developing a visual representation of what's going on here. So first off, if we come over here, we're going to have our UI. We have, okay, so it says count, and then right here we have our variable, and this is actually the count variable, and it's going to display that right here. And so let's say count is initialized to 0. So right now it's going to be 0. And then you have just your add button, and you have your subtract button. And so this is our UI over here. So our visual representation of what's going on, essentially under the hood, is we have this count variable that stores some value, right? And that value is going to be an int. And this is where I'll introduce a more complicated topic that we'll go into in just a second here. It's wrapped by what we can call a state property wrapper. There are multiple types of property wrappers, and you can kind of consider state property wrappers as a sort of subsection of property wrappers. These are essentially property wrappers that you're going to use to declare a state property or a variable that has that state attribute and functions in that way. So that's this guy right here. If we go and highlight that, this guy right here is this right here. These sections of code right here, this is just describing the look of the text, or of the, this is the, basically just the button look. So, you know, you've got what color is the back, or the foreground, what color is the words, essentially, what's the background color, giving it some corner radius, all that kind of stuff, making the buttons look pretty, and showing like, okay, increase, decrease, you guys saw that on the UI. This is where the interesting stuff happens. So you have the functionality that occurs when a button is pressed. So right here you have a button is pressed, the action function is called, and when the action function is called, this takes place, self.count plus equals 1. So what's going to happen is if you click, you know, let's say we click on the plus button, what's going to happen is up here we'll just increment that by 1, right? And now there's been, this is the important part, now there's been a change, sorry, that's a math symbol, change in count, right? Because this plus button just took this, where's my laser? This plus button just took this count property and changed it to be 1 greater than it already was. So now you got a change in count. Well, since it has this state wrapper on it, what's going to happen is SwiftUI is actually going to come up, and this is what one of those first notes was saying, it's going to re-invoke the body function. So it's going to go here and it's going to say, hey, let's run this again, and it's going to go through and it's going to run all of this code, and it's going to get to, where's my laser again? Here we go. This line right here. It's going to go, okay, well, here's count. It's going to come over here. If initially it was 0, but now we press the +1 button, now it's 1. It's going to go and look, and it's going to say, okay, well, count is 1, and it's going to come over here, and it's going to print out, instead of printing out 0, it's going to print 1. And there you go. You have it. That's how it works. And so that's essentially what it's going to do. Is it's going to, we can call this is the re-invoke the body, and then the body is going to re-render the UI, and that's where it comes over here and it replaces that with 1. And the same thing's going to happen when you press minus. So I hope that gives you a good idea of what goes on kind of behind the scenes on the data side. And next we'll look really quickly at just a quick introduction to property wrappers, and then in the next video we'll talk about how to actually use property wrappers in more complex ways and how to use this this technique in more useful ways. And in multiple view structures, we'll talk about what a source of truth is, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, see you then.